Hi, this is Mike McCrease. Welcome back to Advanced Photoshop. And today we're going to explore a really cool technique. It's actually a filter called Displacements. And we're going to create a couple of images here. The first one is going to look like this. And you see it's a cosmetics advertisement for Dolce & Gabbana, and we've got a picture. It's actually a photograph of the actress Angelina Jolie, and it looks like it's kind of 3D, and it's floating above this watery surface. And we're going to do this completely from scratch with the exception of the photograph itself. Our second example is a portrait of a boxer, and we are using text and mapping that across his face and making it look like it's actually printed on his face. It actually follows the forms of his face. So let's go ahead and get started on this. Now, before we actually get started, let's talk a bit about displacement maps, because that's what we're going to be using to create these 3D type effects. Displacement maps are used quite frequently in 3D graphics applications, and it is actually a black and white file or image that is then mapped on to the surface of an existing image to make it look 3D. In this example right here, let me zoom in a little bit. We have an original flat surface, and we introduce a second file which is black and white. And we're going to map this image onto our pre-existing surface, and the parts of the displacement map image that are white are going to be raised up. The parts that are black or dark are going to go down. And so when you see in 3D, the light parts are raised and the black parts are recessed. So in our first file, we're going to create an image and then apply a displacement map on it to give it a watery effect. Let's go ahead and create a new document, which is going to be 11 by 14 inches, and we'll make it 72 pixels per inch. And we'll go ahead and name it. We're going to call it Dolce & Gabbana, and just click on OK. I'm going to create a new layer, so I'm going to go to my Layers panel and create a new layer. And I'm going to draw a vertical box that's about 1/3 the width of the image, stretching it from top to bottom. So let's go to our marquee tool, and we're going to click and drag a marquee. Again, it's going to be about 1/3 of the width of our image size, stretching from top to bottom, like this. We're going to set our foreground and background colors to their default settings. So I just press D on my keyboard, and that's going to set them to our default black and white. And I'm going to apply the clouds filter to my selection. So I'll go to Filter, Render, and choose Clouds. And this is a random filter, so your pattern is going to be different than mine. Now let's free transform this. I'm going to zoom out a little bit here. And I'm going to go to my, I can deselect too, I'm going to go to my free transform tool. And I'm going to pull the side handles beyond the edges of the image. I'll grab a side handle, hold down the alternate key, and just drag straight out so that it pulls both sides out at once. And we're going to drag it off to the side like this. And press Return or Enter. Now I'm going to choose Select All or Control Command A to select everything. And I'll go to my Image menu. and choose crop and deselect. And what that does is it crops off those excess pixels around the edges of my borders. I'm going to apply a motion blur filter to this cloud. So let's go to Filter, Blur, and Motion Blur. And let's blur that about 25 pixels. And you see how it's starting to look like it's water rather than clouds. Let's make it look even more like water by applying a second filter. Oftentimes in Photoshop, a single filter doesn't render a very compelling image, but when you apply filter on top of another filter on top of another, then you can get some really cool effects. So let's go to Filter, Sketch, and Chrome. It's a very big options panel, but you can see these settings right here are going to make it look a lot like water. So let's set the detail. Let's just take our detail slider and let's drag it from the left and to the right. And we'll do the same thing with the smoothness slider to see the different effects. But I think from this image we're going to get really good results if we set the detail to 10 and the smoothness to 3. And click OK. Now it's really looking like water. Let's add a little perspective to it. Let's go to the free transform tool again, and I'm going to take this top handle and pull it down about a third of the way from the top. With it still active, I'm going to right click and choose perspective. With the perspective option selected, I'm going to drag this bottom handle out, and you'll see that both bottom handles will now be affected. We're going to pull that out like this. I'll press return or enter. The contrast on our image is pretty flat, so I'm going to create an adjustment layer for levels or curves. We could go either way on that. So let's open up our layers panel and hold down the alternate key and click on our adjustment layer button and choose levels. Choose use previous layer to create clipping mask and click OK. And you can tell from the histogram we don't really have any whites or blacks in this image. Here's the black range right over here, which is telling us, again, if we read straight down here, these are the values that are missing from this image. And likewise, over on the right-hand side, if you read down, these are the values that are missing on this side. So let's take this input slider for the highlights. I'm going to drag that to the left just till we get to the base of the histogram. And I'll come to the shadow slider and do the same thing. Drag it to the right till we get to the base of the histogram. And now our water has plenty of rich contrast on it. This is an adjustment layer. I can always come back later and change that if I need to. Now let's go to our background layer and let's fill it with 50% gray. I press Shift and Backspace or Delete, and that opens up this panel, the Fill panel. Choose 50% gray and click OK. Now I could have also come up here and chosen Edit and Fill and reach that same panel, but the shortcut, of course, is quicker. Now this is our finished displacement map. It's our black and white image which we're going to use to create a watery reflection. So I'm going to choose File and Save As, and I'm going to save it as Map 1, and I'll save it as a copy and choose Save. Okay, that's saved it as a separate file. We've still got our original Dolce & Gabbana image up here. So let's go ahead and open up the picture of our model, Angelina Jolie. I'll choose File and Open. Navigate to the model JPEG. Open that up. And I'm going to select the entire image, so I'll press Control or Command A to select all. Control or Command C to copy. I'm now finished with this, so I'll close it. Control or Command W. Then, back in our original Photoshop document, we're going to go to the topmost layer on our layer stack, and then press Control or Command V to paste. Now the image may be a little bit big. We can scale it down just a little bit. So I'm going to press Control or Command T, and then I will alternate and shift drag on one of the handles just to make it a bit smaller, not too much. And then I will move it up. I'm just pressing the up arrow key here to move it up a little bit like that, so it's not smack dab in the middle. And then press Return or Enter. Let's give it a little bit of depth. By going to our layer effects, and let's put a bevel and emboss on the edges of that. I'm just going to set the size to 2 pixels, and it just gives a slight little edge just to make it look a little more three-dimensional. So I'm going to copy this image, flip it upside down, and then apply the displacement map to it so that it matches the pattern in the water. So let's copy the image. We'll go to our layers panel and just press, let's go ahead and name this layer first of all. I'm going to take layer 2. I'm going to call that model, just so we're getting a lot of layers here, and it's good to have them labeled when we get over like 2 layers. Let's take layer 1 and call that one water. Okay, back to our model layer. Let's copy that. Control or Command J will create a copy. Let's call this one reflection. Now on our reflection layer, let's flip it vertical. So I press Control or Command T, right click, flip vertical, and then I'll just move it down so that it's just a little bit below the original image. With our reflection moved below the first one, let's go ahead and make that a smart object. I'm going to right click on its layer and choose Convert to Smart Object. I'll choose Filter, Distort, and Displace. And let's set the horizontal scale to 25 and the vertical to 5. After we complete this next step, you can go back and experiment with different settings once you see what they do. Because it's a smart object, we can always come back and change these settings later. I'm going to click OK. It's going to be asking me for a displacement map, which we had saved already, called Map 1. Now choose Open. And look what happens to my reflection. Let's get this panel out of the way here. It takes this black and white image, which is a duplicate of the one we've got right here, and it applies it to our reflection layer so that it follows the contours of it, and it makes it look very realistic. Now we've got some parts here that are blown out. Highlights are pure white. So I'm going to go back to my layers panel, and I'm going to pull the opacity of that layer down, probably to about 60%, maybe. Oh, be anywhere between, yeah, about 60% looks like it does a pretty good job. So let's leave that at 60%. 60 to 65, or just whatever looks good to you. Now, as you can see, our background image is still gray, because we had to do that to create our displacement map, which must be a black and white image. But here we need to go back into it and add some color to give it some life. I'm going to open up my layers panel, and I'll create an adjustment layer just above my water layer. I'll click on my adjustment layer button and I'll choose hue and saturation. I'll click on colorize and I'll drag the hue slider to the right until I get to a nice watery blue. Might be a little on the saturated side, a little too intense. Let's pull our saturation down a bit till it looks natural. Now I want to go back to my layers panel because I had meant for this to affect the background too. The reason it didn't is because I had clipped my levels adjustment layer to the water layer, which quite frankly in retrospect is something I didn't really need to do. So to make this affect both the water layer and the background, I'm going to unclip it from the water layer. I'll move my cursor right in between those two layers there. Hold down the alternate key or option key if you're on the Macintosh and click. And now it's no longer clipped just to the water layer. It now affects my background layer. So it's looking pretty good. Next, I'd like to darken the sky, and I'll do that by adding a new layer above the background layer and apply a gradient to it. So background layer active, I create a new layer. I'll just call that sky gradient. And I'm going to set my foreground color to a 50% gray. And click OK. Then I'll go to my gradient tool. From the gradient picker, I will choose foreground to transparent. Making certain I've got the linear gradient selected. And placing my cursor at the top of the image, I'm going to hold down my Shift key and click and drag about halfway down to the sky. And it doesn't look like much has happened. Actually, very little did happen. But over in my Layers panel, if I change the blending mode from normal to multiply, you see that the sky becomes dark. Now I may want to pull that opacity down a little bit. It probably got a little too heavy. There we go. So I'm cutting that down to about 65% or so. And now you have a nice dramatic sky, nice watery surface. The only thing we left to do is to add our text. So let's go to the top of our layer stack. And I'm going to pick up my text tool. For my font, I'll use Arial. I'm going to set the size to 100 points. The color to white. And I'm going to type in Dolce & Gabbana in all caps. Now the ampersand, I want to be a little bit smaller. So I'm going to select that, and I'm going to drop that down to 65 points. Now the space in between these letters is probably a little too much. So let's adjust our tracking and kerning. I will triple click with my type tool to select all the letters, and then holding down my alternate key and pressing my left and right arrow keys, I can bring the letters closer together or farther apart. I want them to be close but not touching. And that looks pretty good. This is called adjusting the tracking. I'm going to adjust the kerning. The kerning is when you adjust the space between two individual letters. To do that, I just click with my text tool right after the ampersand. And once again, I hold down the alternate key and press the left arrow key to bring those two letters closer together. I'll move to the other side of the ampersand and do the same thing. Now let's center our text and make it a little more readable. We're going to click on our selection tool. I'll press Control or Command A to select all. And then our alignment tools become visible at the top. So I'll choose my fifth option, which is Align Horizontal Centers. That's going to align it perfectly. Deselect. Then I'll use my down arrow key and move the text underneath the image. And then lastly, in my Layers panel, I'll lower the opacity a little bit just so that we can see the image through the type. I'm going to bring it down to 60 or 65%. Now if you lose the text and a white part of the image, I wouldn't do that. You want to make certain that your text is visible to your audience. So if it's difficult to read, then go ahead and leave it at 100%. But I think if you can drop it down to 60 or 65%, it's going to look pretty cool. So there's our finished first example. Let's go ahead and save this and close it. Now on our second image, we're going to use a displacement map as well, except that we're going to use it to map text across the face of our subject. So let's open up the boxing portrait JPEG image. I'm going to make a displacement map from this image. Control or Command A to select all. I'm going to copy it. Control Command C. Create a new file. Control or Command N. Click OK and paste. In this new file, I'm going to desaturate it completely. I'll create an adjustment layer for hue and saturation. Pull your saturation all the way down because, once again, it has to be a black and white image if it's going to be a displacement map. Now let's increase the contrast. The image is pretty low contrast, and our displacement map image needs to have pretty high contrast for it to work properly. So I'll create an adjustment layer, this time for levels. And you can see from the histogram that we don't have many highlights. In fact, really no highlights to speak of. We've got some good midtones and some shadows from the background. So let's take our highlight slider and I'm going to drag that over till we get to the base of our histogram. And what that's doing is, again, if we read down to the output scale beneath that, all the areas that were this shade of gray are now white. I'll take my midtone slider and I'm going to drag that to the left to further increase the contrast. And I think that if you drag it till you have a value of about 135, that will look pretty good. I'm going to apply a filter to layer 1, and that is the despeckle filter. This is going to make my text look a little bit smoother. So I'll go to Filter, Noise, and Despeckle. And you may not have seen what that did, but it actually made the image just a little bit softer. Now let's go ahead and flatten this image and save it. I can right click and choose Flatten Image. And we're going to save it as a PSD file. And we can just call this map 2. Take my cap locks off. And let's close that file. I want some text that I can map across my boxer's face. And I'm going to use a text generator from a website called Blind Text Generator. So let's go to blindtextgenerator.com. And this is a great site because oftentimes you might be in a situation where you need some dummy text just to see what a project would look like if text were in a text container, for example. And here you can create lorem ipsum, which is Latin, oftentimes used for dummy text. And you can explore these different options here. More Latin, European, some English text from far away. And you can explore these. And then there's one I like a lot, Kafka. This is the opening paragraphs from Franz Kafka's surrealist novel, The Metamorphosis. And you can see that I can set the number of words, characters, paragraphs, and so on and so forth. I'm going to just accept those defaults. So I'm going to click on the Select All button. I'll press Ctrl or Command C to copy. Now back in my original image, I've still got it selected, so let's deselect that. And let's go to our Type tool, and let's click and drag a text container that covers the boxer's face. Let's change our font size probably to about 35 points. I'm going to change the color to 50% gray. Now if I want to be really exact, I don't really have to be this exact, but if I were to set the red, green, and blue to 128 each, I'd have a perfect 50% gray. And then I'll press Ctrl V to paste my text. I'll move my cursor over one of the corner handles. I'm going to click and rotate this text so that it is at the same angle his face is. And you can adjust the handles to make certain that all the text covers his face. Now let's go ahead and click our selection tool to accept that, and in our layers panel, let's convert the text layer to a smart object. Right click, convert to smart object. Next, let's create a layer mask for the text layer. Using a paintbrush with black paint, we're going to paint over any of the text that extends beyond the edge of his face to mask it off. Let's go ahead and mask off any of the text that goes over his eyes, because that will look kind of weird. Touching up a little bit around the edges of the face here. And let's go ahead and mask off any text that's overlapping the lips as well. Adjusting my brush size as necessary. Now back at my layers panel, we have been on the layer mask So let's click on the layer thumbnail to make it active once again. And let's choose Filter, Distort, and Displace. This time we're going to set the horizontal scale to 10 and the vertical scale to 10. And you can experiment with these, but I've done a little bit of experimentation on my own, and I found that these settings here work pretty good. But because we set this as the text layer as a smart object, you can always come back and change that if you need to. Now it's going to ask for your displacement map, so I'll choose Map 2 and click Open. And then it applies that displacement map to your text, so the text follows the highs and the lows, or the lights and the dark parts of the image. Now it doesn't look really good right now, but let's do this. Let us go to our blending modes, and we're going to change that to color dodge. Now that looks pretty cool. It's a little bit on the intense side, so I'm going to drop my layer opacity down a little bit. And that's just kind of whatever looks good to you. I think around 50% looks pretty good. I also see I have to go back over here and mask off a few parts that I missed earlier. So we want to fine-tune that to make it look good. And there's our finished image. Really, really nice way to add text to an illustration. So there you have it. Two great techniques for using displacement maps. Submit both those to me on Blackboard, and as always, I'll look forward to talking with you again. This is Mike McCrease.